This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast dealing with the dark feminine. I'm Breege Burke, and our topic this week is a Roman deity known as Dea Tacita, or Tacita if you're using classical Latin. And tacita is a word that comes from the Latin word that has to do with silence, and therefore she is, in fact, a goddess of silence. Now, Dea Tacita is interesting because she is venerated at a particular time of year, particularly at the Paramours, which is a festival that is connected to the dead. It's a 9-day festival, and you honor Dea Tacita on the 9th day, which is usually February the 21st, which is also known as the Feralia. And she's very interesting in her backstory. So I really want to spend this podcast talking a little bit about her backstory, where she comes from, who she is said to be. There's some variety, some minor variety in her story, but the main text of it tends to be the same. And also the way in which her festivals are celebrated. And another thing about Dea Tacita, in that she is sometimes known as the mother of the Lares. Okay? And the Lares being the household gods of Rome. So we're going to talk a little bit about that because there's so much to unpack there that's actually quite interesting. I'm going to try to be succinct about it, but there is a lot of different tangents I could go off on with this one, so it's very interesting. Okay, so first of all, Dea Tacita. It's said that her worship, she may have been originally an Etruscan deity, or connected to an ancient Etruscan deity, just as the Lares probably were. And it was said that her worship was introduced to Rome by Numa Pompilius, who is one of the kings of Rome who is actually associated with the one who brought most of the rituals and the practices of, certainly of the Greeks, and perhaps of the Etruscans as well, into Roman culture. The Romans didn't initially have a kind of mythology as they started to, I suppose, rise in prominence when they started to have their kings, and when they had these encounters with these other civilizations, they became interested in their myths and in their drama and so forth, but they were selectively. If you read the annals of the Romans, Livy's annals, they talk about how selective they are about choosing which gods they're going to worship, which myths tend to resonate with the ones that they already had. So Dea Tacita is a deity that was certainly brought in by Numa Pompilius. So what is the backstory here? Okay, so Dea Tacita, it says that she was a naiad, okay, which is kind of a nymph figure called either Larunda or Lara. It's kind of seen the name listed both ways. And according to Ovid, she's considered to be, she's also known as Dea Muta, for being mute, and is a goddess of the dead, but also of silence. And it said, Ovid says that there's a rite propitiating Dea Tacita in order to seal up hostile mouths and unfriendly tongues. And we'll talk about what that means on the Feralia on the 21st of February. According to Ovid, it's because Dea Tacita had her tongue ripped out by Jupiter, who of course is the equivalent of Zeus in Roman myth. Jupiter was angry with her because she told the nymph Chthonia to flee from him because he had planned to rape her. In this guise, Dea Tacita was worshipped at a festival called the Larantalia on the 23rd of December. Right, so she's worshipped at the Paramours and at the Larantalia because she's connected to the Lares, which are ancestral spirits, and the Paramours, which is specifically associated with family spirits. Okay, and it says, goddesses mutai tacitae were invoked to destroy a hated person. An inscription from the Cambodunum in Reta, someone asks, ut mutus sit cortus, and erat fugiens ut mus, that Quartus may be mute and that he wander fleeing like a mouse. Plutarch, who described Tacita as a muse, states that Numa Pompilius credited Tacita for his oracular insight and taught the Romans to worship her. Now, what's interesting is he's talking about her as an oracular figure, so really a figure of necromancy in a way. Although it's said that, as a deity of silence, she may not be very strongly connected to, the oracular part of it is a little, that doesn't feel, it doesn't feel like that really is part of her main purpose and function, okay? Although those who, the old magician's credo is to know, to will, to dare, and to be silent, and invoking the idea of tacita, or to be, or to be tactful, right? To watch what you say. And the implication here is that, she has her tongue ripped out because she warns another nymph about Jupiter's attempt to sexually assault her. Now, there's another version of this in which she is. They say that what she does is Jupiter has certain intentions, and it's not explicit about what those intentions are, but that she actually tells Juno, his wife, who is the equivalent of Hera, and this angers him. Either way, she's telling something that Jupiter does not want her to tell, and this is why her tongue is ripped out. Now, we can talk about the nature of what it is she gets her tongue ripped out for, because that seems to have a whole series of implications by itself. But it's interesting. Let's talk a little bit about this. Here's another version of this story from Weird Italy, actually. And it says, Naiad, who's the daughter of the river dweller Almone, was originally called Lara or Lala, a name derived from the Greek word meaning to talk or chatter. Because of too much talking, she was punished by Jupiter because she had revealed his intentions to Juno. Jupiter had her tongue cut out and entrusted her to Mercury to lead her to the underworld. On the way, Mercury fell in love with her and had carnal intercourse with her. From what other kind is there? Anyway, from this act there were born twins, the Lares Compitalis, who in the religion of ancient Rome were given the task of guarding the city streets. So this is a particular type of Lares that is connected particularly to the roads and the crossroads in particular. Which is interesting, too, if you want to get into the whole thing about the Diana Trivia or Hecate, or as guardians of the crossroads. But these are more. This is interesting that this seems to be connected to some kind of ancestral spirits. But these are the children of Dea Tacita and of Mercury, okay, who is we associate with Hermes. And so there's this. It's interesting because Hermes seems to be very much associated with talking. He's a deity associated with communication. He's a messenger. And she is literally just the opposite. She is the goddess of silence. So it's almost like at that intersection being between speech and silence, right? How much is to be said and how much is not to be said, when you, in this thing. So it's interesting. As a goddess of silence, Lala thus assumed the name Tacita or Tacita Muta. Annual rites in her honor involved sprinkling the head of a fish with pitch, which is like tar, roasting it in wine, and drinking the resulting drink. It was a propitiatory rite to prevent the spread of slander in the city. The Romans combined this holiday with that of the dead, the Feralia, because Lara was the mother of the Lares, and because having her tongue cut off, the goddess was a symbol of death, characterized among other things by eternal silence. Okay, so this is what Weird Italy has to say. There are other deities that we've talked about that are connected with silence, or at least that are shown, Etruscan deities shown putting their finger over their lips. And I talk about that in the Lewis Attorney podcast, which if you're interested in that, I recommend you go over and have a listen to that, because I feel like there's a sense of that as well. The fact that there is a specific deity associated with silence that seems to come out of the Etruscan is something where the idea is that Rome's secrets have to be guarded. Okay, that you cannot. Whatever it is connected to the city. And of course, this was also a deity connected with graveyards as well. So if you you do not want to give away, it's like not wanting to, it's like espionage, right? You don't want to give away too much, tell too much about what the secrets are of the city to others who might, that might leave you vulnerable in some way, right? Now, but the fact that the Feralia takes place at the end of the Parentalia also has a very strong familial association with it. Because, while she is said to be the mother of the Lares that haunt the crossroads, when we think about the Lares in general, these are spirits of the dead. The angry Lares would be known as Lemuria. And there is another separate rite to, to deal with the Lemuria, who are the angry dead. Okay. There's a strong implication of ancestry there. Not only connection to the family, but the connection to the city as well. And there's a very strong feeling about what family you belong to. If you read the Aeneid, there's the section where Aeneas goes to the underworld to visit Anchises. Is this whole long thing about the royal line of Julius, right? Which is the line of Julius Caesar, and later of Caesar Augustus, and a lot being made of noble names. And that was certainly a thing, not just in Rome. You saw a lot of this in the ancient world as well. Even in the Bible, I talk about this in the Virgin Mary podcast, where the royal lineage of Jesus is something that is that certain gospels make something of it because it matters to certain people. Yeah. So you have this figure, Dea Tacita, who is associated with silence. She is this nymph who has had her tongue cut out, and okay, well, I've often said that when you're talking about gods, you can't talk about them like they're people. They're not people. They're not, they have nothing in common with people. They're just, so when they violate certain rules or do certain things, we can't look at it, in the same way socially that we would look at it for ourselves. Because, that comes out of the idea that the Greek gods are just sort of glorified humans, but they're not. They're forces, and typically these stories tend to represent something else. But when we think about this, the idea that Jupiter, was about to have his way with Chthonia, or he says certain things, and then, she either saves the one nymph from being assaulted by him or overtaken by him, and so therefore he cuts her tongue out, which does not seem just. I think of the story of the goddess Hestia and Priapus, when Priapus, who's a extraordinarily well-endowed kind of figure, usually associated with Venus or Aphrodite, but he's a very strongly, fertile figure, and he sneaks up on Hestia, who's the goddess of the hearth, who's a virgin, and a donkey brays really loudly and wakes her up because she's napping, and scares him away. And of course, Hestia then makes the donkey her sacred animal, but he's hated after that by Priapus, because it's the one who warns, who warns off the would-be attacker. And for this, she gets her tongue cut out. And I thought about this. I said, Jupiter or Zeus is the king of the gods. He's the one with the power. He's the one with the control. It's very patriarchal in the way that it comes across. And if he, and again, we can't, if we're looking at him as this archetype of this father or masculine figure, the idea is that, if he wants to, expand his family in these different directions, that it's sort of his right to do so. And we don't talk about in any of these where the women seem to have their own autonomy as to say, no, I don't want this. And if they do, it generally becomes a thing where, to escape from him, she has to be turned into a tree or a river or something. It's not generally something that ends too well. But Zeus is famous for this, as is Jupiter. And this idea that it's almost like women protecting each other from this male power. This is what's being punished. It's like the woman is kind of pushed into silence, right? You could take that angle on this. I don't know that ultimately I wouldn't just focus exclusively on that angle, because I think there's something else about the idea of the silence, not only of the grave, but the silence of, they're talking about it as being in the world of the dead, but it's also just being in the other world, like the secrets of what lies beneath, the secrets that are hidden. And this is why the idea of remaining silent is often very fundamental to certain esoteric orders and magical practices. The reason that they're secret is because, that you can't, it's not the kind of thing that can just be shared ordinarily with people. It's something that is, that the silence impregnates it with a kind of power. So she becomes this deity of the power of silence, the power of not sharing and not telling. But interestingly, she gets that role because she is a deity of, they're talking about it like slander or gossip, but she's actually somebody who, she's more like a whistleblower, right? Like she's more like a true speech. So you can kind of almost view this on the one hand as a goddess who is speaking true speech and gets punished for that because it doesn't suit the machinations of the institution. It could be commenting on the wisdom of speaking something, almost like that's an act of subversion against the king of the gods, right? But at the same time, that silence is also the place where, that's pregnant with possibility. It's like an empty space. It's all of the mysteries of what we don't know. It's that aspect of the feminine that is represented by possibility, by void. It's that space in which things can, in that silence, in your own silence, that's where you hear your inner voice, right? In the silence of, if we think of the High Priestess card in the tarot or something like that, it's this implication that, some things are better left unsaid, or that something in that, there's some kind of a truth in that silence that can't be expressed in words. Okay. So there's definitely, you can get a feeling of that as well. And the fact that we are doing this in connection with ancestors and ancestral spirits, the actual ritual is quite interesting. I think I have it, they do talk a little bit about it here. Let me see, I think I have it written down here. Yes. Okay. In ancient Rome, Dea Tacita, the silent goddess, was a goddess of the dead and silence associated with the Feralia festival on February 21st, which concluded the Paramours, a 9-day festival for ancestors. On this day, a ritual using incense, black beans, and a fish was performed by an old woman, usually a drunk old woman, to seal up hostile mouths and unfriendly tongues, an act of sympathetic magic to ward off gossip and evil spirits. In Ovid's Fasti, it says it's also intended to appease the dead and keep them separate from the living, which is really what the whole Paramours is about. Honor your ancestors, but, keep them away. Temples are closed, there's no fires lit, doors are closed, offerings are left out in the street. People go visit the graveyards, and they bring offerings, but, they do rituals to keep their ancestors, who can now walk about freely during the Paramours, from entering their house. So here's the Dea Tacita ritual. An old drunk woman, acting as a proxy for the goddess, leads this ritual among a circle of other girls. The woman placed 3 lumps of incense under a door threshold where a mouse was buried. She placed 7 black beans in her mouth, rolling them around during the ritual. Now you'll notice there's a number of rituals connected with the Paramours with black beans, because these are said to be the food of the dead. She smeared the head of a fish with pitch or tar, and pierced it with a bronze needle, then roasted it over a fire. Wine was sprinkled on the fish, and the remaining wine was drunk by the participants. Okay, so this was the idea that you were sealing up the mouths of anyone, not only who would slander the city, but perhaps also the family. And this brings us to the idea of reputation and gossip, and the way in which words, even if somebody, you think about it, if somebody slanders you, and even if somebody comes and proves that what was said was wrong, there's always going to be certain people who are going to still retain the gossip image, or retain that image of you, even if you have been, vindicated by somebody. And that's always the danger of gossip, the idea that a loose tongue can actually cause damage. And so, so this is a ritual that ostensibly to protect both the city and the household. And if we think about the Lares and the parentalia as being family or ancestral spirits, and that this is a particular ritual performed at the end of the parentalia, then yeah, there definitely seems to be a connection here to maybe telling family secrets or family gossip or things like that. And and this kind of brings us into the idea of Dea Tacita as the mother of the Lares, or the household gods. And she's referred to here as Mater Larum. And again, the myth that's mentioned about her is exactly the one I just told you about, the naiad who gets her tongue cut out. And she was exiled from the daylight world to the underworld abode of the dead, the Ad Manis, a place of silence, led there by Mercury and impregnated en route. Her offspring are as silent or speechless as she is. It says if their mother's nature connects the Lares to the earth and to the underworld, they are, according to Taylor, spirits of the departed, and their mother a dark or terrible aspect of Tellus, the Terra Mater. The Lares and the Mater Larum have been suggested as ancient Etruscan divinities. The title or forename Lars, used by Rome's Etruscan kings, has been interpreted as king, overlord, or leader. Greek authors offered heroes or daemons, we've talked about daemons before, as translations for Lares, and Plautus employs a Lars familiaris, where Menander's Greek original has a hero shrine. So yeah, the Lares are definitely embedded. The genius and the Lares, or the genii, are embedded in Roman culture. Because Roman religion was absolutely populated with spirits. It is everything in Roman religion is alive. And the same was also true of Etruscan religion. Every sign in nature is an omen. It's a communication, right? But there's certain things that don't yield their secrets, and some things are better left unsaid, even if they are truthful. So, so very interesting figure here that we're talking about. Other than the naiad story, there doesn't seem to be another particular story about Dea Tacita. I'm just looking through my notes here to see what else we have about her. Yeah, so I'm just reading from historyandarchaeology.com. It says the Romans held their dead in great respect. They also were terrified of them. They were de manes, the good dead. Well, again, they always called the dead the kindly ones because they didn't want to make them angry. Honored ancestors not to be forgotten. As such, it was customary for living relatives to visit family graves on the deceased's birthday to celebrate the day and remember the life of the departed one. However, Roman society as a whole also honored the dead publicly during 2 months of the year. In May, Romans celebrated the Lemuria. February was the month of the Parentalia, a festival dedicated to de parentes or de parentalis, the family dead. During this 8-day festival, which was closed by a 1-day festival known as the Feralia, life paused while families observed the rites of remembrance for their ancestors. Although every Roman marked the Parentalia, each family's ceremonials were held in private, as clans gathered to keep the memorials of their dearly departed alive. However, the Parentalia was much more than an annual family memorial. The rites began on the 13th of February when, according to the calendar of Philocalus, a Vestal Virgin performed the Virgo Vesta Parentat, the opening rituals for the dead. This association with death tainted the period of the Parentalia. No incense for altars, no fires for hearths were lit, according to Ovid, as priests barred the doors of the temple. No marriages were performed. Even the city's political life was affected as magistrates left off their official togas and courts closed. This was a big holiday. During this enforced holiday, Roman citizens retired behind their own closed doors to celebrate the rites of the dead among their own family. It was believed during Parentalia the dead arose to wander among the living. However, although dead, their brief sojourn on earth, they needed sustenance, so families would leave consumable gifts for their shades. Ovid describes how relatives left offerings lying on a shard in mid-street, or at the tombs of the departed, where they gathered to build hearths and add prayers and ritual words, and leave sprinkled corn and a thrifty grain of salt. It says archaeological evidence from Pompeii suggests these visits to the graveyard could be pleasant affairs. Many tombs and necropoli were equipped with seating areas for visitors set within peaceful garden settings. Some of the more elaborate, according to Virginia Campbell, even had private triclinia or dining rooms or cooking facilities. So during Parentalia, families did not just visit the grave or leave a bunch of flowers. They lingered. They prepared meals on site and stayed to eat with the deceased. And of course, we see this also in rituals for Samhain too. When we think about the Celtic Halloween or Samhain, where you have the meal for the dead, right? You have this meal with the ancestors, because breaking bread or sharing a meal is the way in which you make a connection, and they mention this here too. So by sharing a meal and leaving behind a carefully crafted floral garland of violets or similar flowers, the family ensured their ancestral dead continued to watch over them and aid their endeavors. Right, because the thing about the dead is that you have their either, they either can be watch over you and they can be helpful in some sense, although of course in the underworld, what they're able to do might be limited to some degree because they're very weak beings, but certainly they could be called upon. On the other hand, they could just be very angry about being dead, and you really didn't want to deal with the results of that either. And it goes on to talk about the Feralia. And it says, no account of the public rites of the Feralia survive, though its prominence on public calendars indicates it was a major event. Literature, however, offers clues, and of course this says the Invaro on the Latin language is the festival of the dead from inferi, the dead below, and to bear, because at that time they bear viands to the tomb of those to whom it is a duty to offer ancestor worship there. Okay, and then Ovid, they talk about Ovid and the ritual that I just described, and then so this was so it's interesting. The Romans had a lot of rituals around their dead because, they honored the dead, but it kind of goes back to Sarah Iles Johnston's phrase about the Greeks as well, which is the idea of to honor and to avert. It's like, hi, we respect you, please stay over there. I mean, they didn't bury their dead in the city. The necropolises were outside the city, where you had to go to see the graves. And the Lares and household gods, these were the ancestral spirits that lived in your home, and you had to propitiate those as well. And of course, because the city is a kind of family, if you are a Roman citizen, that is some kind of family, then there are Lares connected to that as well. And this seems to be what the Mater Larum, or Dea Tacita as Mater Larum, seems to be connected to. This wider image here. So we have this idea here, okay, we have these rituals, we have this deity who seems to be connected to the ancestral spirits connected to both the city and to the Roman citizens, okay? And she's a deity who is a naiad who gets to be where she is because she basically reveals Jupiter's secrets, right? Typically it's never a good idea to reveal any secrets of the gods, no matter what they are. And in this case, Jupiter had an intent that maybe he didn't consider so terrible, but maybe Chthonia would have. I mean, we get into the idea of the women who are just, I want this woman, so I'm just going to take her. There's not this acknowledgement of women as, even female deities and nymphs and things as having their own autonomy in that matter. Although we do see men who, when the reverse occurs, we see men fighting them off, although in some cases the nymphs do run away or fight off the deity. But there's almost like this idea that they can just be taken. I mean, certainly if you look at the Iliad, it starts over these concubines. These are women who were taken as spoils of war. And after the Trojan War, you see this as well. There's definitely the idea of women as property, and and the idea was that the more status that the man or the god or the hero or the warrior or whoever it was who took them, that was somehow an honor for them. You're the concubine of this great person, right? Now, of course, today we certainly socially have a very different idea about that, though there are some people who still marry for position and so forth. And indeed, there's kings who are born out of lineages where they say, oh, well, I have one divine parent, So whether this is purely political or in some cases whether or not Zeus or Jupiter's as the king of the gods, it's interesting that Jupiter astrologically is associated with expansion, right? So Yes, he has his wife and they have his children, but it's almost like he feels as king, it's his right to expand, beyond that. And again, he is a deity and not a person. But nonetheless, this is behavior that we do tend to see justified in certain societies where, the man seems to have the right to do these things. Where, strictly speaking, if they're married and in a monogamous relationship, they really don't have the right to be doing these things. This was the first thing that the philosophers had pointed out when they started to bring the idea of ethics into religion. So, yeah, I think, though, we have to kind of look at this and say, okay, well, what's the meaning beyond this? Because just like with Persephone being taken away by Hades, that tended to be more of the idea of the young girl being brought, the virgin being brought into, from girlhood to womanhood, okay, and therefore encountering the underworld. And in this case, it's almost like this is a woman who, because Zeus was not allowed to, or Zeus was thwarted from his creative efforts, the one who thwarted him is relegated to silence and to the world of the dead. Okay, so in other words, because she averted some kind of creative act that perhaps he wanted to engage in, and again, we can talk about the ethics of it, but remember, ancient Greek religion is not ethical, then she becomes relegated to this silent place. So in any case, she does become connected to the goddess of silence, of not telling things that should be told. That shouldn't be told. Not telling things that shouldn't be told. And, but I don't know. I just find that her origin story does make me feel like, well, is that something she should have told? What would be the reason? From Jupiter's perspective, no. From Juturna's perspective, depends on whether or not she was amenable to the situation. If she was not, then there's, I don't know. It kind of almost talks about Dea Tacita as the one who is punished for, protecting women or protecting women's sort of autonomy in terms of who they mate with or who they create with. So I don't know. That kind of leaves things in an interesting way, but we also have to remember the cultural context that we're speaking in here. Of course, again, in other stories, it seems that she just pissed off Zeus because he told things to his wife that he didn't want his wife to know. Now, whether it was the same type of thing or not is not clear to me from that Weird Italy story. Nonetheless, there's this idea that some things are taboo, some things cannot be talked about. And I feel like when you're talking about these kinds of things, like, there are certain secrets about the city, secrets about the family, and perhaps secrets even about the underworld itself that are not supposed to be told. And Dea Tacita becomes a kind of representation of this. And so she has this kind of role magically in in Roman culture and perhaps otherwise even of not allowing somebody to say something that shouldn't be told, or going even beyond that to slander and gossip, saying things that really should not be told. Okay, like where they're patently untrue. So in other words, what shouldn't be told, whether it's true or whether it's untrue. It seems to be the gist of it here. So yeah, this is interesting because I know I had done something for my Patreon subscribers at one point on silence and the virtue of silence. I think I had talked about it with respect to occultists and occult communities, and a lot of what's out now. On, I don't know, in probably the esoteric world, broadly speaking, including witches and things like that, and the importance of silence, the importance of not sharing certain things, not because there's some odious evil secret, but because some things just shouldn't be shared. Once they're shared, there's the idea of, like, I think of Merch Eliad's idea of the distinction between the sacred and the profane, right? Now, whether or not there always needs to be such a distinction, certainly we can say that when we are talking about matters that are a little bit deeper or matters that are of spirit, or matters that may be more esoteric. It's not the kind of thing, you just, discuss, I don't know, casual conversation in the grocery store, right? With a random person. You know what I mean? It's not, a lot of this is kind of things, it's not the everyday things. In astrology, interestingly, Mercury is associated with the third house, which is communication, short journeys, self-effort and things like that. But it also has to do with the community, with local communication, the day-to-day things, the business transactions that you do, right? Your relationship with your neighbors, stuff like that. And Mercury as having to do with communication in this context has to do with, talking about the day-to-day stuff. It's not talking about the deep stuff. It's not getting into deep subjects. That happens to be the realm of the opposite ninth house, which is connected to Jupiter. Okay. Jupiter has to do with religion, higher education, deeper knowledge, and the discussion of things that are something that's in greater depth, or having to do with expanding one's knowledge beyond just the casual, the mundane, the ordinary, to something that's deeper, something that's imbued with spiritual meaning, something that gets beyond the obvious. And this seems to be the realm. So it's almost as though, and it's funny, so Jupiter cuts out the tongue of Dea Tacita, or Lara, as she is called, and sends her off with Mercury. Mercury, who is the god of that kind of common local speech. I mean, if you're looking at it astrologically. And then from that, she is sent to the underworld, which really in astrologically would be the 12th house. That's the place that is hidden, which is also ruled by Jupiter, by the way. Traditionally, Pisces was traditionally ruled by Jupiter. Now I think it's ruled by Neptune, but traditionally it was ruled by Jupiter. So, interesting thing to think about if those of you who are astrology buffs. That higher, deeper knowledge is not always to be shared. Now, on the one hand, when it comes to certain types of knowledge, sharing it with everybody, it may not be understood, it may not be used correctly. This was something Lao Tse, I remember, had said at one time, that the laws should not be shared with everybody, because then everybody tries to, they take something that not only is just read at face value, but might have a certain deeper significance, and they try to talk about it in the most superficial way. And that's not the way it's really meant to be talked about. People do that with scripture all the time. Scripture is something that's meant to be read almost more poetically, and it's often read in a prosaic way, which makes it into like, oh, well, this says this on this line, so therefore this is the rule. Like, that's not really how that's meant to be read. And so there's that element of it. I think of the Gnostics, too, who had said that gnosis was not for everybody. That was something we were always taught in Catholic catechism, was like, oh, well, yes, but those who espoused more Gnostic philosophies, they believed that gnosis was a special thing, and, not everybody could achieve it. And, of course, the Christianity we have is for everybody, But that Christianity is also not for everybody, especially not in Catholicism, because there's a whole range of knowledge that is not shared with the hoi polloi, with the average believer. Okay, it's not shared with the average believer because they say, well, no, this is for the learned, this is for the clergy, right? So it's almost like represents this separation between not only esoteric knowledge, but learned knowledge, and sharing learned knowledge with quote-unquote common people who they feel don't have the capacity to understand, right? So, I don't know. You could look at this idea of silence in a couple of different ways. On the one hand, it's being circumspect, being careful about what you say, not spreading gossip, not spreading rumors, which again is something that's associated with, they always talk about the little old ladies nattering and, with their gossip and so forth. And it's not just little old ladies, but that's sort of the stereotype, right? And, so there's common gossip, and they're saying the things that are really of this kind of more profound, pointing to something more profound should not be caught up in this kind of gossip. So we can talk about it in terms of reputation and family, but also the way in which knowledge can be used, and how is it going to be used, and what are the power of words, right? We can get into that as well. What are the power of words? Do they? People will talk about, you think about ancient druids and other cultures that would never write things down because words were very powerful. And things would be sung or they would be spoken, but in many cultures, you only, talked about certain things or did certain rituals or recited certain things at certain times because it was inauspicious to do it at other times. So it's almost like, on the one hand, it's sort of like, okay, there are certain things that I think realistically you need to be circumspect about. On the other hand, when does that turn into an elitism that says, oh, you're not capable of understanding this? But I don't know. I think it's a line that's probably known by the person who's had the study and the experience. I think there's the idea that you don't necessarily want to take certain things on without those things, any more than you'd want someone to operate on you who has no doctor's credentials, right? You want there, for certain things should not be shared. You need a certain level of knowledge to be able to do certain things. And certainly when we're talking about the great mysteries of the universe, they're not really easily spoken about. They just have to be experienced, which means that one has to go through a certain set of, what you want to think of it, ordeals or rites or experiences or whatever, to be able to really understand. Because if anybody who's had a spiritual experience and then sits down and tries to have a conversation with someone about it, if you were to just sit and talk to somebody about it over a cup of coffee, it loses something. It's something that should not be said. So anyway, just some thoughts on Dea Tacita and this whole idea, the importance of silence, but then that other side that says, well, what happens when somebody wants to truth tell, but the people in power say no, But there may be kind of an analogy here to what I think is best illustrated by those astrological houses, the 3rd, the 9th, and the 12th. The Jupiter-ruled houses, and then Mercury, right? As the one who leads. I mean, he is a psychopomp, so he leads he leads Lara to the underworld. But by the same token, he represents that kind of speech that is harmless, really. Third house speech. I mean, again, unless you get into local gossip and so forth, it tends to be more harmless speech. It's the everyday acceptable social speech, right? The stuff that you can share with people, not the stuff, whether it be family secrets, whether it be knowledge of things that go over people's heads, whatever it is. We see this importance of Tacita, this importance of silence. And silence, of course, is just very important to hearing the truth of anything anyway. You can't, if your mind is running at 800 miles an hour all the time, you can't actually hear yourself. You can't actually come to an understanding of whatever it is you're trying to, whatever it is your own inner sense of wisdom is trying to tell you. Okay? It's very difficult to do when your mind's going here and there, everywhere all the time. You need to have those moments of silence, because in silence actually is where truth is expressed. It's just not always expressed in words, or maybe only shouldn't be. So anyway, that's my thoughts. Thank you so much for joining me. I think I've been saying over the recent episodes, this one I will be finishing up at the end of December 2025 with Chthonia. You can still check out Chthonia.net to see my work and to see the previous podcasts. And also on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Chthonia podcast, one word. If you are, you may already be watching this on YouTube. I am still on Spreaker. If you would like to subscribe to the podcast, check out back episodes as well. Spreaker will be up probably until next August, so you can check it out until then. I'm also on Instagram, Chthonia Podcast, one word, and Chthonia Podcast, two words on Facebook. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you next time.